Good day and welcome back to part 2 of the belt making video. Today what we're going to cover is the dyeing, stitch work, final assembly. I have to create a belt loop. So if you haven't seen part 1 of the video, I'll link it up here and we'll carry on now. As well, I would really appreciate if you would like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you'll be notified anytime I come out with new content. Okay, so I apparently missed the first bit of dyeing there. Simply, all you'll do is grab one end, put some dye on your sponge, and run it all the way across. Then you have to let that side dry. And then same with this. Now, you're better off to wear gloves during this. I don't normally. I don't mind getting a little bit of color on me. But, yeah. And then we'll do the other side in a few minutes. Okay, now that it's dried a little bit, I'm going to actually do the other side. So again, or not the other side, sorry, the other way, just to make sure there's a nice even coat. Get any small spots that you've missed. Now you don't want to go over it too many times on one pass, because it'll take too much to dry. I love this mahogany color. I don't know if it shows up yet for you guys, but it's a beautiful color. So that should be dry enough. Now I'm going to do the back side. Now the unfinished side of leather takes a little bit more dye than the finished side. But it's also normally not as visible, so you'll end up having to work it in a little harder on this side. If anyone has any other ideas or tips and tricks to dye leathers, I am more than willing to hear you out, because like I said at the beginning of this channel, I am still learning myself. And the same for this piece here. Now, I have the slot, so I'm going to try to actually get some more in the slot. And the holes, and they look pretty good, so I'm going to let that dry like that. I'm going to do one more pass. Now you can also lay down paper or anything like that, just so that you don't end up with a mess. Just going to touch the edges here. They won't take dye very well. So I'll come back when this is all dry. We'll do the stitch work, and then we're almost done. Stitch work. Put the final pieces together, and it's good to go. Oh, I'll do a satin sheen leather finish as well. Dull it out a little bit and give it a protective quality for water. Now that it's almost dry, I'm going to actually apply the satin sheen first. So this is satin sheen by EcoFlow, and it's a leather finish that'll help provide some waterproofing, and it also does a nice satin sheen. It says to apply a light even coat with a slightly damp sponge. Well, I have a slightly damp sponge, and I'll apply it now. So it doesn't take much. Okay, so this is dried enough now that we can do the back side. So I'm going to flip both pieces over, get my sponge. Okay, so we'll see you in a few minutes after this all dries. So what we're going to move into now that everything's dry is the stitching. And I'm going to start from the top stitch hole, and I'm going to work down one side all the way down to the end. Then I'm going to tie it off and start over, and I'm going to do it from the top hole all the way down to the other end. So what I've done already before we had the power outage is cut out my my thread, which is roughly twice the distance that I'm going to stitch, and that's just so that I have enough to get to the end, because if you start and stop stitching, it doesn't always look that good. So the first thing that I am going to show you guys, since I haven't done it yet, is how to thread your needles. So these are a fairly blunt needle with quite a wide head. So I simply give it a little flick with my thumbnail and feed it through. Now I've recently seen some techniques that I'm not 100% sure how you do, but I'm going to try it out. I'm going to feed the needle back through the thread. And for saddle stitching and stuff, apparently this, yeah, there you go. Ties it off nicely so that it holds itself. I'll show you what I did previously to do it. So again, using a thumb, just slide up, the thumbnail flattens it out, and then I'll feed it through. So what I used to do is just fold it in half, pull it tight, and then work with it like this. But I'm thinking that that technique where you feed it through, so feed it back through a piece, back down, and it basically ties a little knot in itself so that it'll hold. Yeah, that's pretty convenient, I think. Okay, so what I'm going to use today is the saddle stitch technique, and that's basically the needles are coming in from both sides. So to start, sorry, you're going to see my chest here for a bunch. I start with the top hole, try to feed it halfway through, so take my threads, and there you go, that's halfway through. Now I'm going to go down this side first. Key thing to note, always start with one hand or the other. I normally start from the front. I don't know if that's the right technique, but I start from the front. Feed it through my hole. I need to tighten this up a little bit. And then once that's tight-ish, feed the other needle through from behind. Because these are fairly tight holes, what you want to make sure is that these needles don't actually catch the other thread. And then I'm simply going to grab both sides of the thread and give it a little tighten. So I'll do that a couple more times for you guys. So I've got front, back, front and back. So start from the front, feed it through. Now this is your basic saddle stitch. So that's through. I'm going to lift the thread up, find the hole from the back, feed it through, making sure not to go through the other thread. Pull it through, grab both sides, tighten it up. I'll do one more. Right needle, so the right is the front. Feed it through. Lift from the back side through, making sure it doesn't go through the other thread. Then tighten them up. So you'll see, if I can zoom that in a little bit, it's going to be a nice contrasting color. So we'll go through this. I'm going to speed this up so that you guys don't have to watch me do every thread. If you guys do have questions about saddle stitching in particular, that's my most common stitch technique, post them in the comments below. Now what you'll see here is my punch didn't actually go all the way through on a couple holes, so I'm just following it with an awl. So rather than doing the awl through all those holes, because I just noticed when I was looking through on the back, is that there was quite a few holes that weren't finished. Not sure if I was getting tired while I was doing it or what, but I didn't make it all the way through. So I went back and I used my 6-prong. It's quite easy. Once you already have the holes started, you just follow along in the holes again. And now that they're all the way through, I'll carry on. So a convenient point here is that my needle dropped off the table, which without that little tie-on piece, the needle would have fallen off. So this is actually working out really well, and I highly suggest So I did actually have the needle pull off the thread. It does make it kind of nasty after it's done that, but I just applied a little bit of wax back to the thread. I'm going to try that again, because I did like how long that held up. It definitely saved me some time. Okay, so I'm about a third of the way through the first side. So as you can see, hand stitching takes a very long time. Now, it is gonna look fantastic when it's done. And I love the look of hand stitch, but I'm extremely jealous of people that have the big stitching machines for leather. Maybe someday. They're pretty pricey, and we'll get to it. Anyway, I'm actually going to skip ahead probably to the end of this one side. Then I'll start probably maybe a quarter of the other side of the stitch from the back view, just so that you can see what it looks like on the back as well. Okay, so I've been going at this for a little while. I switched the way I've been doing it just to expedite it a bit. And you'll notice I am running short. And I have quite a bit of belt left, so I should have probably done 2.5 times. So what I've done is now I'm going to finish this stitch, and I'm going to have to start another one. So it's simply going back a stitch without going through another stitch, which can be challenging if the holes are small. Go. So with the back one, I'm not going to. What I'm going to do is go back a stitch and go underneath it. So I'll show you that real quick. So like this. actually finish that. Pull it down through. Now I'm going to make a knot. So this is my other needle. Okay, so with my front needle, I'm going to drop it through the loop that I made with that. And loop that as well. And then just do one more knot. And when you're doing leather work, I highly suggest you always carry a lighter with you. Because what this will do is melt that wax down, and you'll end up with a nice finished stitch. So what I'll do from here is I'll carry on from this hole and work my way to the end of the belt. Then I'll do the other end, and we'll see you when we're done. Okay, we're just finishing up the last few stitches here. And then we'll tie this end off and start over for the other end. So one thing I will say is that a stitching pony is definitely more ideal to a bench vise, because on a bench vise, when you're working on things that have long thread, you end up getting stuck on the vise handle, some of the bolts, things like that. So this last one is just barely a hole. Drag it. It's more of a slot, but we're gonna drag it around, go back through that last hole, ensuring that you don't go through. The previous threads. There we go. Then I'm going to go back one more on the front. There we go. Pull it through. We'll just cut it. And I'm going to just tie it a couple times behind, like I did for the restart. And I tried to do opposing knots. Tighten them nice up. Trim them a bit. And because this is a wax thread, I'll burn the edge. Let it burn down a bit. Squish it down. And that creates a nice tight end. So next I'll flip it over. I'll show you the first little bit. From the back end view, it's almost identical to the front, except there's no stitch line to follow other than the holes that are punched. So I'll do that real quick here, and we'll probably skip until the end of the main belt is done. I have my threads all threaded up and lined up in the first hole. I'm going to turn you a bit, and you'll just see what it looks like starting from the other side. So the threads are really long right now. So from the front to the back, like that. Pull it through until you get a little bit of tension on that first thread. With the first thread, you don't want to pull too tight until you have it both front and back, so that you don't end up slipping too much one way or the other. Right, so feed that through. Now that I'm through, I can tighten. And again, front to back. Pull all the way through, trying not to get tangled on all the bits and pieces of this. And then feed it through, back to front. And same on this side, all the way through. Give it a quick little tighten. Front to back. All the way through. Stuck on the handle, all the way through. Now that I've got a few tightened, I should be able to pull on this thread a little tighter so that it doesn't slide. Okay. I'll zip through a few more. And then let you guys carry on. And meet you when we're done. Okay, so now that you've seen the basic saddle stitch, I'm going to carry this on off camera, and I'll see you guys when we move on to the, well, I'll show you the completed stitch work and how good it looks. Very time consuming. I imagine in total hand stitching this entire belt will at least take me a couple hours. But man, does it ever make a project pop. Stitch work on leather, especially if it's contrasting stitches, it pops, makes it look so good. So I suggest that you do stitch work, take your time. It's really rewarding once you're done. It's a real pain while you're doing it, I'm not gonna lie. But if you've got time to kill, it's a great thing to do. Okay, so I will see you guys once this is done. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on with the decorative stitch work on the belt hardware itself. I'll zoom in and I'll fast forward through this. You've already seen it on the belt. So I had to use some pliers on a few of those holes. That's just to help the needle get through some of the tighter holes, the tighter stitch holes. Anyway, what I'm going to carry on to next is making a belt loop. This is actually going to go inside of the hardware. So I'm going to really quickly run through dyeing. I've already done the edges, so dyeing, stitching, and actually assembling this onto the hardware loop. I'll probably have to stitch it and glue it on. So what I use for glues is EcoFlow Leather Weld. Holds really well. I actually have a belt where the loop is strictly done, actually the belt that I'm wearing right now, the loop is strictly done in the leather weld and it's held up for about a year. So it's really good stuff. I highly suggest it. Anyway, we'll get on to this. Okay, so what we're gonna move on to is making the little belt loop. So I've cut this, I haven't slicked the edges or anything. I'm actually gonna dye it first and then do the rest of the work. So because this is a small piece, I just have my dye here in a little jar. And I'm gonna use a dauber like this, but I already have one that is used a bit that I'm gonna use for this project. Same color dye. So this is just showing the dauber process. The back side very quickly here. Okay, so while that dries, I'm going to plan out some stitch marks here. I'll show you how I stitch this. Okay, so this is dry enough now that I can start slicking the edges. So I'm going to do that. Again, just a little bit of water along the edge. Use my slicking tool. And you'll see we get this nice finished edge. So I've already started on this. This is the second side. I wetted a little too much on the one end, so I've had to add a little more or a little less pressure and just carry on with it a little longer to heat it up so that it doesn't fold over on itself. Especially with a thin leather, it's actually easy to get it too wet. But you'll see that even with light pressure, very light pressure, I get a very nice finish on that edge. So I'll do this a little longer, then I'll do both the ends, and I'll probably cut back in when I'm stitching this. There we go, all edges are done. Now it's just a matter of punching some holes, stitching this together, attaching it to the hardware, and we'll get going. Okay, so for punching these holes, I'm just gonna do just off the edge. I've got the full 4 holes there. 4 holes there, 4 holes on the opposing side. I'm just going to cross stitch them. So for these, I'm actually going to stitch them together like this with a loose stitch and then pull it open. So because this is just going to be a quick stitch and it's going to be hidden under some glue, I'm just going to use some darker thread that I have a lot of. I can just knot off the start. Again, it doesn't have to be pretty like that nice saddle stitch. So I'm going to knot off the start so that I can just stitch through and then carry on. Now I don't want to do this stitch too tight, but I do want to do it a couple times just to make sure that it holds. See there. Now, like I said, I'm going to cross stitch back. So just a simple cross stitch. Oops. I don't want that string in there. Pull that out, get that out of the way. So, simple cross stitch, and this is just going to simply get pulled out straight, and then we'll manufacture it in. I just need to tie it off, so I'm going to do one loop back through. Bring it up, tighten it a little bit. And tie it off. double knot. Cut those two ends down. And burn it up. Again, hidden pieces of stitch work don't need to be extremely nice. You just have to make sure that they're actually going to hold. A little bit of satin sheen. And then we're going to let it dry. I should have done this before I stitched it, because now I gotta invert it and do the inside as well, just to make sure that it's fully waterproof. Okay, so we'll flip that back, right side around, let that dry a bit so that the glue will hold, and we'll put this all together. Okay, so I've changed my mind on how I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to stitch this all. So I should have planned this out earlier, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stitch the hardware on just in between. Let's let it focus. Just in between here, straight across over to here. And that way this buckle will be nice and secure. Then I'm going to attach the belt loop in as tight as I can, and I'm also going to stitch along this edge. So I'm going to punch those holes now, and we'll see you when I'm done. Okay, so what I've done is I've figured out where my holes need to be, and I've punched them out. So now I'm going to have to work the stitch lines in as I go. So number one, I'm going to attach the buckle itself, and I am going to do this stitch line from there all the way across, all the way through, front and back. Then I'm going to actually add some glue in between to add my belt loop. I'll tighten that down, let the glue set a bit, and then I'm going to do this stitch line all the way through here. And then this can attach to the main belt itself, which is pretty much done, and this project will be complete. So let's just move you over a bit so that you can see what I'm doing, and we'll carry on from there. So all I've done is added the hardware and mounted it in my vise. Now comes the fun part of trying to stitch this all together. So I have to hit that lead hole.
Give me a try, give me a try. Just give me, give me a try, give me a try, give me a try. Just give me a try, give me a try, give me a try.
So we cinch that down fairly tight. Now the nice thing is when you're doing a saddle stitch on something like this, to finish it, I simply need to go part way through a stitch and then feed it out the side, and we can fully hide our stitch inside. So that's only through one layer of the leather. And the same thing with the back. Go back a stitch, but come through just the one layer. That basic square knot is going to go all the way in between the pieces. Trim off the remnants and burn it down in just like we did before. Just tap that in. And there's what we have so far. So next, we're going to bring in belt loop. Stitch work is actually inside, so it's going to go tight in. I'm going to glue it down just to make sure that stitch work doesn't rotate out. Stitch on the final bit, and this hardware is complete. Just to show you what I was talking about, I have some leather weld here. I'm going to take a tiny little bit of it. I'm going to dip it in just to spread it out a bit. I don't want too much in here. I just want to make sure that it doesn't twist around on us. I spread that in fairly liberally. I don't want to glue any holes shut or anything. Then I make sure I'm going to attach this the correct way. I'm going to slide that in, trying to center everything. Then I'm going to pull it as tight, and I might even give it a little push with this, just to make sure everything's nice and tight in there. Now I'm gonna have to put this on the vise just for a bit, let it dry. Okay, so that's been drying for a while. I'm gonna pull it out. Yeah, that should be good. That's gonna look real nice. Just pop this off. Now we just have to finish that last stitch line, and this is ready to be attached. I'm gonna have to thread up my needles, and I'll see you in a few seconds. Okay, my needles are threaded up. We're just gonna finish this real quick.
Give me a try, give me a try, give me a try. Just give me a try, give me a try, give me a try.
Give that a good long multi-pull cinch to make sure that's tight. And then same thing. I'm actually gonna pull this out so that I can do this a little easier. And go back a stitch, but I need to only go through one layer of the leather. I'm going to do my square knot. The hardware is complete and ready to go with a decent belt loop. It's gonna fit nicely on the completed belt, and we'll show you that. Okay, so all I had to do was take that mounting hardware and mount it through our holes, and now our belt is complete. I'll show you on me, just around my shirt, what this looks like all finished. That was a good project. Took a little longer than I was hoping. Editing wasn't as nice as I was hoping, but I hope you guys enjoyed this. There is the completed project from start to finish. I know it was really in depth. As I go, I may do tutorials strictly on stitching, or maybe we'll get into hole punching or slicking. That way we can refer back to those rather than doing that every time that we actually do a video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was fun for me. Like I said, big learning project. Editing videos is a little more challenging than I was expecting, but I hope to keep doing this for you guys. I think my next project will actually be, unless I get enough voices going on the chat, or my Twitter account, which is @craftherb. Yeah, I'm happy with this. So please, if you enjoyed this, hit that thumbs up button, the like, the subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and you'll be notified every time a new video comes out. I'll leave it at that. Good work, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Give me a try, give me a try, give me a try. Just give me a try, give me a try, give me a try. Just give me a try.